Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's gentle exploration drifts into a realm shaped not by equations or telescopes, but by imagination itself, a place where stories slip between the seams of time and where a single rumour can bloom into an entire mythology. We're going to take a calm, wandering look at time travel hoaxes and why the human mind, remarkable as it is, often longs for the extraordinary. These curious tales of chrononauts, future-born travellers, and mysterious messages from timelines that never existed have a way of settling into our collective imagination like dust on an old photograph, and while they may not be real in the physical sense, they reveal something tender and deeply human about our need for meaning, wonder, and a small doorway beyond the ordinary. But before you settle in too deeply, if you find these quiet explorations soothing, I'd be grateful if you gave this video a like and perhaps subscribed, only if it feels right. And if you're still awake enough to share, tell me where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. There's something comforting about imagining people scattered across different cities and different clocks, all arriving here in the same moment of stillness. Now, whenever you're ready, feel free to dim the lights, loosen your shoulders, let your breath soften, and let the night gather gently around you. Maybe the air is cool, or the room is just the right amount of quiet. Maybe you're curled beneath a blanket, or listening with your head resting against a pillow that's slowly giving way beneath you. There's no need to hold on to any particular thought. Let them drift if they want to drift. We'll be right here, moving slowly, one idea at a time. Tonight we begin our journey into why humans invent travellers from the future, why we believe in stories that bend the clock, and why these illusions, even when disproven, still glow softly in the corners of our imagination. So take a breath, feel the weight of the present moment settle like a warm hand on your back, and let's ease our way into the first chapter of this quiet exploration together. There is a moment almost everyone knows, the small pause where you glance toward tomorrow and wonder what might be waiting there. It might happen while you're walking home at dusk, or stirring a cup of tea, or staring at the ceiling just before sleep settles over you. The question rises, gentle and persistent. What if we could step outside time, even for a moment? What if we could lift the veil on tomorrow, or revisit the places our memories keep tucked away? This simple wondering is where humanity's fascination with time travel begins, not with machines or paradoxes, but with a soft, very human desire to feel free from the steady rhythm of the clock. Long before anyone imagined glowing consoles or humming engines capable of bending timelines, ancient peoples told stories of prophets who glimpsed the future in dreams, or seers who heard whispers from years not yet born. These tales were rarely about mechanics. They were about longing, reassurance, fear, and hope. Time in these early stories was not a line but a river, sometimes calm, sometimes restless, and always carrying messages from places we could not reach. When people sat around fires and spoke of omens, visions, and destinies unfolding, they were trying to soften the sharp edges of the unknown. They were trying to feel a little less alone in a world that changed faster than they could comprehend. As centuries passed, our stories shifted from myths to manuscripts, from manuscripts to novels, from novels to films. The idea of travelling through time took on new forms. Machines made of brass gears, glowing portals, shimmering doors, swirling tunnels of light. But even with all the creative inventions, the emotional core stayed the same. Time travel remained the ultimate what-if, a place where imagination could roam freely without consequence. And maybe that's why it holds us so tightly. It gives shape to questions we don't always know how to ask. There is comfort in imagining a world where mistakes can be undone, where choices can be revisited, where lost moments can return like soft echoes. Even the idea of seeing tomorrow's lottery numbers isn't really about wealth. It's about the pleasure of imagining certainty in a world that rarely offers any. The fantasy of bending time is, in many ways, the fantasy of easing our deepest anxieties. We don't crave control as much as we crave understanding, and the idea of time travel feels like a bridge between confusion and clarity. Yet our attraction to time travel isn't only about comfort, it's also about wonder. When people gaze at the night sky, something quietly awakens. The stars, scattered like silver dust across the darkness, remind us of distances beyond imagining. The universe itself carries a kind of ancient calm, and within that calm the human mind begins to wander. We dream of worlds where time moves differently, where the past might touch the present like two waves meeting on a shore. Even though physics tells us time has rules, our imagination tells us it also has possibilities. Modern science offers a gentle reminder of this duality. We know, for instance, that time can stretch and slow depending on how fast you move or how strong the pull of gravity is. But instead of stating this as dry symbols, it feels softer to say, time is not rigid. It sways like a curtain touched by wind. Your head experiences time ever so slightly faster than your feet, simply because it lives farther from the pull of the earth. The universe is full of little bends and curves like this. Quiet reminders that time itself has a kind of personality, a rhythm that shifts depending on where you stand. When people first learned this, it didn't diminish their longing for time travel, it deepened it. If time can bend even a little, perhaps imagination can follow that bend all the way into wonder. And so, we hold on to stories where travellers walk between centuries, not because we expect them to be real, but because they speak to something hidden and tender. They offer a gentle form of escape, a small window through which we can imagine other outcomes, other paths, other versions of ourselves. In the soft hours of evening, when the world grows quiet and the day begins to fade, this dream becomes especially vivid. Time feels less like a line and more like a lake, still, reflective, holding moments beneath its surface. And as we look into that surface, even the tiniest ripple can become a doorway. A thought becomes a memory becomes a possibility, and possibility becomes a story. Humans have always been story-shaped creatures, weaving narratives to make sense of the swirling complexity around us. Time travel is simply one of the grandest stories we've ever told ourselves, and so the timeless dream continues. Passed from myth to folklore, from folklore to fiction, from fiction to quiet personal longing. It doesn't matter whether the machines exist or whether any traveller has ever stepped from the shadows of tomorrow. What matters is that the idea makes us feel something: hope, curiosity, wonder, or the gentle ache of imagining that life could unfold in more ways than one. Whenever you're ready, we'll drift a little deeper into the stories humans have built around these dreams, stories of travellers who never were, but who continue to walk beside us in the collective imagination. There's a quiet shift that happens inside you when something truly astonishing appears before your eyes. It might be the first time you saw the ocean stretching far beyond the curve of your sight, or the moment you stood beneath a sky so full of stars that it felt like someone had dusted the entire night with shimmering salt. In those brief instants, the world grows wider, your breath catches, and a soft hush falls over your thoughts. This gentle, expansive feeling is what scientists call awe, a word that sounds simple, yet carries entire galaxies of sensation within it. And tonight, we're going to settle into that feeling, not through big discoveries or dramatic revelations, but through the quiet understanding of how awe reshapes the mind, calming it, stretching it, and opening it to possibilities that feel larger than life. When people experience awe, something remarkable happens in the brain. But instead of imagining complicated diagrams or glowing maps of neural activity, it's easier to picture it like this. The background chatter inside your mind, all those tiny thoughts about errands, schedules, unfinished conversations, and yesterday's worries, begins to soften like a radio gently lowering its volume. A network deep within your brain, one that usually keeps you focused on yourself, your own story, your to-do list, starts to dim its lights. Scientists call this the default mode network, but we can imagine it more simply as the inner narrator, the voice that spends most of the day describing the world through the lens of your own concerns, or gently asks that narrator to step aside for a moment. In its place, a sense of spaciousness opens. You begin to feel part of something larger, something that extends far beyond your own footsteps. It doesn't matter whether the feeling comes from a wide landscape or from a small moment, like watching light filter through leaves in a way that seems almost impossibly delicate. Awe isn't about size, it's about perspective. It's the mind tilting just slightly until the familiar world looks new again. What's even more interesting is how the body responds. In moments of awe, your breath tends to slow, your heart settles into a softer rhythm, and the tension in your muscles fades without you even noticing. There is a shift in the balance of your nervous system, a quiet redirecting of energy from vigilance toward restfulness. You felt this before, even if you didn't have a name for it. The sensation that time is stretching, or perhaps pausing, giving you a small gift of stillness. Scientists sometimes describe this as an increase in vagal tone, a phrase that sounds technical, but simply means your body is leaning gently away from stress and toward restoration. This calming wave within the body intertwines with something equally soothing in the mind. Awe has the peculiar ability to dissolve the boundaries between the self and the world. Instead of feeling trapped inside your own thoughts, you begin to sense yourself as part of a larger pattern, a wider story. It's the same feeling a person might get while listening to music that seems to echo something ancient, or while standing in a place so quiet it feels untouched by time. In these moments, the mind opens like a window, and a breeze of wonder drifts through. This is why stories about time travel, other worlds, or impossible journeys captivate us so deeply. They evoke a kind of imaginative awe, a soft reshaping of our sense of what might be possible. Even if we don't believe these stories in a literal sense, they offer us a space where the edges of reality feel less rigid. They allow us to wander into thought experiments where time is not a straight path, but something that bends, loops, and folds like fabric. And while physics offers equations to describe how time behaves under extreme conditions, it feels gentler to say, time can stretch like a ribbon pulled taut, or ripple the way light dances across water. These soft images carry the essence of the science without the sharpness of mathematical symbols. There's another reason awe feels so nourishing. When your mind enters this softened state, the flood of small frustrations that usually weigh on your day begins to settle like silt in a calm river. The water clears, and suddenly your thoughts feel lighter. You may have noticed this without realizing it. Perhaps you spent a moment watching clouds shift in slow motion, or you paused during a walk to admire the quiet curve of a moon rising above the rooftops. For a few breaths, the world seemed simpler, kinder, easier to bear. Awe gives the mind the same gift that deep rest gives the body, a momentary reset, a gentle clearing of the slate. Interestingly, awe doesn't just calm us, it also connects us. After experiencing awe, people tend to feel more compassionate, more generous, more open to others. It's as if that small widening of perspective makes room for empathy to bloom. The self feels a little less sharp around the edges, a little less isolated. In the vastness of a starry night, or the hush of an ancient forest, there's a sense that life is shared, intertwined, and quietly meaningful. And this emotional widening is part of what draws us toward extraordinary stories, including the tales of time travelers who step through impossible doorways or return from futures that never came to pass. These stories give us a glimpse of something beyond ordinary life, and even if they are fictional, they spark the same kind of imaginative openness that awe brings. You can feel this connection in small, everyday ways. When you hear about someone dedicating their life to a daring scientific mission, or when you read a story about a message found in a century-old bottle drifting across the sea, your thoughts expand in a direction that feels both tender and curious. Time travel hoaxes, strange as they may be, often tug at the same thread. They tempt us with the idea that the world is bigger and stranger than it appears, that hidden corners of reality might still exist waiting to be discovered. As we drift further into this exploration, keep in mind that awe doesn't need to be dramatic. It can appear in the smallest things, the gentle rhythm of your breath, the pattern of raindrops travelling down a window, the memory of a moment when you felt held by something larger than yourself. Awe is simply the mind remembering that wonder is always nearby, woven into the ordinary as much as the extraordinary. And with that gentle feeling resting around us, we can begin to wander toward the stories that have captured human imagination for decades. Stories of travellers who claim to step between years with ease, leaving behind clues that sparkle like fragments of a dream. In the quiet, these tales become more than hoaxes. They become reflections of our shared longing to see beyond the limits of our own time. There's a particular kind of thought that drifts into the mind during quiet moments, the sort that doesn't arrive with footsteps or fanfare but slips in softly, like a feather settling on the surface of still water. It's the thought that begins with what if. What if I had turned left instead of right? What if I had spoken up that day? What if I could visit the moment everything changed? These gentle questions don't demand answers. They simply open a door to a room made entirely of possibilities. This room, the space where imagination roams freely, is where the seed of time travel grows. Time travel is different from other fantastical ideas. Flying through the sky, shrinking to the size of an atom, talking to animals, each has its wonder, its charm. But the fantasy of stepping through time holds a deeper emotional pull. It blends curiosity with longing, hope with memory, the thrill of discovery with the ache of regret. It touches both the future and the past in a single breath, which may be why it feels larger than other dreams. When people imagine time travel, they're rarely picturing circuits or engines or glowing energy spirals. They're imagining a chance to wander through their own lives with the kind of freedom that reality rarely allows. One reason time travel feels so universal is that the human mind naturally moves through time, even when the body cannot. You can leap backward through decades in the space of a heartbeat, simply by recalling a childhood street, the sound of a family member's laughter, or the smell of a dish you haven't tasted in years. You can leap forward through time by imagining what tomorrow might bring, what decisions you might make, who you might become. Memory and anticipation are the mind's gentle versions of time travel, soft, quiet, and always happening beneath the surface. Every person, in a way, is already a traveller between moments. This ability to mentally step across years without moving an inch is one of the most remarkable things about being human. Other animals remember danger, hunger, and affection. But the human mind can replay an entire scene as if rewatching a familiar film, lingering on details that would otherwise have vanished. It can project itself into tomorrow or next year with vivid clarity, constructing possibilities stitched together from hope, concern, and imagination. It's no wonder, then, that the idea of physically moving through time feels like an extension of something we already do effortlessly within our minds. Another part of the appeal lies in the way time travel invites us to imagine a different version of ourselves, perhaps one where a difficult moment unfolded more gently, or where a long-lost opportunity was taken instead of passed by, perhaps one where a conversation went differently, or where you had a chance to offer comfort at a moment when you didn't know how. These thoughts are tender, not because they're grand or dramatic, but because they reflect an emotional truth. We all carry small regrets, unrealized dreams, and quiet wishes that a chapter might have turned out differently. Time travel turns these private feelings into a landscape we can explore without judgment. Even the scientific concept of time adds to this fascination. Physicists describe time not as a simple line marching forward, but as something that bends and flows, affected by motion and gravity. But rather than thinking of it as a complex diagram, it's more soothing to imagine time as a long ribbon that curves gently in space, or as a river that slows in some places and quickens in others. When an astronaut travels very fast, for example, their experience of time becomes slightly different from that of someone standing still. Instead of imagining numbers or equations, picture it as two travellers walking along parallel paths, one on smooth ground, the other on a soft incline. Their steps feel similar, but the pace changes in ways almost too delicate to notice. This idea that time can stretch or relax depending on where you are and how you move gives people a feeling that perhaps the universe is more flexible than it seems. Not in a way that allows dramatic leaps into ancient civilizations or far-flung futures, but in a way that whispers, time is not as rigid as you once believed. It's a quiet invitation to wonder, and wonder is often where the daydream begins. Stories about time travel take this wonder and weave it into narratives that feel deeply personal. When someone imagines visiting their future self, they're not always seeking knowledge. Sometimes they're seeking reassurance, proof that things will be all right, that confusion will settle into clarity, that the person they're becoming still feels familiar. When someone imagines travelling to the past, they might be seeking closure or understanding. They might want to look at a moment they didn't fully grasp at the time and see it with the eyes they have now. Those imagined journeys are emotional acts, shaped not by fantasy alone, but by the quiet needs tucked inside the heart. Even fictional time travellers often embody this emotional journey. They're not only explorers of distant ages, they're explorers of their own choices. They meet past versions of themselves, future versions or echoes of people they once knew. Through them, we see our own reflections, our hopes, our fears, our yearning for second chances or for glimpses into what lies ahead. And there is a softer pull as well, the desire to witness history up close, to stand at the edge of a moment that changed the world, to watch ancient cities breathe or future landscapes unfold. The imagination takes these possibilities and paints them with gentle strokes. The distant past becomes not a set of dates, but a warm, flickering image of people living lives as real and fragile as our own. The future becomes not a cold, unknown place, but a horizon filled with potential. Time travel invites us to see ourselves in a larger context, as part of a story stretching far beyond our brief moment here. Perhaps that's why time travel feels like the ultimate daydream. It brings together the emotional threads of memory, imagination, curiosity, regret, and hope, weaving them into a single idea that feels both comforting and exhilarating. It allows us to drift beyond the boundaries of our own timeline without ever leaving the safety of the present. It lets us imagine that life is not a single straight line, but a tapestry of paths, each with its own colours, textures, and quiet possibilities. And so, with this soft understanding resting in our thoughts, we can begin to wander toward the people who have, at least in stories, claimed to slip through time itself. Some arrived with warnings, others with predictions, and a few with tales so peculiar that they continue to echo through the years. These chrononauts may not be real, but the fascination they inspire says something true about us. It reveals the dreams we carry, the questions we hold close, and the gentle longing that connects us all across the shifting landscape of time. There are stories that arrive with a whisper, and others that step into the world as if wrapped in a faint fog, half seen and half imagined. And then there are stories like the tale of John Titor, stories that appear unexpectedly, settle into the collective imagination like a quiet visitor, and refuse to leave, even long after the lights have revealed there was never anyone there. Among all the legends of time travellers, John Titor's story is the one that lingers, not because of its accuracy or evidence, but because of the strange, almost nostalgic comfort it provided to people at a moment when the future felt uncertain. The year was 2000, a time when the internet still felt like a new frontier, a wide open landscape where strangers met in quiet digital corners. Forums were cosy in their own way, places where a handful of curious minds gathered to discuss everything from old engines to early science fiction dreams. It was in one of these corners, a technology forum of all places, that a username appeared, Time Travel 0. The name alone felt like a pebble dropped into still water. Ripples followed. The person behind the username claimed to be a soldier from the year 2036. Not a scientist, not a mystic, but someone whose duties, according to his calm, matter-of-fact tone, involved travelling through time to retrieve an old computer system from the 1970s. His explanation was strangely ordinary. A piece of archaic technology was needed in the future to fix a larger problem. The idea seemed too specific to dismiss outright, yet too peculiar to fully believe. It was in that delicate balance between the precise and the impossible that the story found its footing. What made John Titor's presence compelling wasn't just the claim itself, but the way he spoke. His messages were patient, articulate, oddly gentle. He didn't shout about the future. He described it with the tone of someone recalling a distant memory. There would be political conflict, he said, a civil divide, tension blooming slowly and painfully. He talked about community farming, fragmented nations, small enclaves of technology still functioning amid broken infrastructures. It was a future shaped not by spectacle but by quiet struggle, a picture that felt strangely familiar, as though lifted from the anxieties already drifting through the early 2000s. People asked him questions, sometimes playful, sometimes serious, and each time he answered, the world he described expanded just a little, like a lantern glow widening in a dim room. He spoke of the machine that brought him there, a time displacement device resting within a sturdy, unremarkable vehicle. It wasn't sleek or futuristic. Instead, it sounded like something built in a garage, with dials and switches described plainly, almost lovingly. Rather than dazzling listeners with technobabble, he treated time travel like a practical tool, something functional and imperfect. In doing so, he made the impossible feel almost domestic. Even his description of the mechanics felt like a bedtime story dressed up as physics. Instead of equations, people imagined a machine bending the world around it the way heat bends air above a flame. He said the machine created a kind of bubble where time flowed differently, like a small current drifting gently out of step with the larger river. Whether scientifically sound or not didn't matter. the way he spoke turned theoretical ideas into soft images. Fields curving like sheets of fabric, clocks drifting gently apart like two boats on quiet water. The simplicity of those images made the idea feel strangely plausible, and the internet, always eager for wonder, leaned in closer. As the months passed, the story grew. Some people collected his posts, organising them as if assembling chapters of a book. Others analysed his predictions, searching for hidden clues or patterns. A few skeptics pointed out inconsistencies, but even their objections added to the story's glow. Mystery thrives when illuminated from many angles at once, and Titor's tale had become a prism through which countless curiosities refracted. Then, as unexpectedly as he arrived, he announced he was leaving. His mission, he said, was almost complete. His timeline was calling him back. And with a final series of messages, he slipped away from the forums entirely. The quiet corner he once occupied felt emptier than before. Over time, people watched for the events he predicted. Some strained to match news headlines to fragments of his story, hoping to find proof that he had been real. But the dramatic conflicts he described never quite unfolded. The world took its own winding path, messy in ways he hadn't outlined, calm in places he had warned would fracture. Gradually, most accepted that he was an invention, someone who had woven a careful, atmospheric fiction. And yet, even after the truth settled, the story continued to feel special. Perhaps that's because John Titor was never just a hoax. He was a reflection. When he spoke of fractured societies, people recognized their own worries. When he described small communities surviving through cooperation, they recognized their own hopes. And when he described a future shaped by both hardship and resilience, he echoed the quiet strength people often forget they carry. The story worked not because it was factual, but because it was familiar. Even today, more than 2 decades later, his name resurfaces from time to time, like a leaf drifting back into view on a slow-moving stream. New listeners discover the tale, and for a brief moment they feel the same peculiar blend of curiosity and comfort that captured people long ago. It isn't the evidence that invites them in, it's the atmosphere. The gentle cadence of someone describing a world half-shadowed and half-lit, a world that feels close enough to touch, but distant enough to wonder at. John Titor may not have come from 2036, but he revealed something very real about the present, the human desire for stories that make the vastness of time feel a little less daunting. Stories that give shape to our collective imagination. Stories that allow us to drift into the unknown with a soft sense of companionship. And as we drift onward, the echo of his tale leads naturally toward other travellers who never were, figures who stepped onto the stage for a moment and left behind footprints made entirely of curiosity, illusion, and the tender longing to believe that time is more fluid than it seems. Some hoaxes begin with elaborate stories, carefully shaped over weeks or months. Others begin with a simple joke, one that unexpectedly slips free from its original context and drifts into the world like a leaf carried on a wandering breeze. The story of Andrew Carlssin belongs to the second kind. It's a tale that started as satire printed on rough paper, yet somehow grew into one of the most repeated time travel rumours of the early internet age. And what makes it even more fascinating is not the details it contains, but the way it reveals how easily the imagination can transform a small spark into a glowing ember. The legend begins with a short article in a well-known tabloid, a paper famous for wild headlines and playful absurdity. It printed stories about alien encounters, mysterious creatures, and celebrities said to be living secret double lives. Readers of the newspaper understood its tone. It was a place where the boundary between truth and fiction was intentionally blurred for entertainment. but the early 2000s were a time when articles, once shared online, often travelled without their original context. Someone could see a headline floating on a message board without knowing it came from a paper known for tall tales, and so the story took its first step into a new and unintended life. The article claimed that a man named Andrew Carlssin had been arrested on suspicion of insider trading. The part that made the story sparkle, just enough to catch someone's eye, was the explanation Carlssin supposedly gave. He insisted he wasn't cheating the stock market. He was simply from the year 2256, visiting our timeline with knowledge of which companies would succeed. He had turned a modest $800 into $350 million, the article said, by making a series of investments that seemed impossibly accurate. His captors, according to the piece, were baffled. He refused to explain the mechanics of time travel, saying the technology was too advanced for 21st century minds. It was meant to be humorous, a kind of fictional dessert at the end of a paper filled with similarly imaginative stories. But once the article left the printed world and entered the borderless expanse of the internet, people encountered it without the wink that originally accompanied it. On a forum in one country, someone shared the article as a curious anecdote. In another, the story was posted as a question: "Has anyone heard of this?" A few readers recognised it as satire. Others weren't so sure. And still others, perhaps caught in the quiet hours of the night when imagination grows more flexible, wondered if there might be a sliver of truth hidden somewhere within. The details were just specific enough to feel intriguing. The precise amount of money, the unusual timing of the investments, the calm insistence that advanced knowledge of the future explained everything. Even though no actual arrest records existed and no official agency ever confirmed any part of the story, it continued to circle, gathering momentum with every retelling. The internet, like a forest filled with echoes, has a way of making a single voice sound like a chorus. What helped the story grow was its simplicity. Unlike other time travel tales filled with complex machinery or cosmic explanations, this one was grounded in something familiar. The stock market, with its unpredictable rises and falls, its patterns that seem mysterious to anyone not immersed in its daily sway. To imagine someone navigating it with supernatural accuracy felt almost comforting. It created a gentle fantasy that somewhere out there, a version of humanity had learned to move through time with grace, using knowledge not to rule the world but to make clever, precise decisions. But the Carlssin tale is only one part of a much larger pattern in time travel folklore. Long before digital forums existed, newspapers occasionally printed stories that blurred the line between fiction and curiosity. Some of them were deliberate jokes, others were misunderstandings that snowballed into myths, and a few were simply odd coincidences presented in ways that encouraged the imagination to take the lead. One famous example is the story of Rudolph Fentz, a man supposedly found wandering the streets of New York in the mid-20th century, wearing clothes decades out of date. According to the tale, he carried coins no longer in circulation, and a letter addressed to an ancient address. When questioned, he seemed confused by the modern world, as though he had stepped into it by mistake. The story spread quietly at first, then loudly, gaining followers who debated whether he had slipped through time. Only later did researchers discover its origins in a piece of fiction, published long before the rumour took on a life of its own. Even more famous is the time-travelling hipster, a photograph that has circled the internet for years. The image shows a man standing among a crowd at a historical event in the 1940s. He appears, at first glance, to be wearing clothing that looks surprisingly modern. A graphic patterned sweater, sunglasses with a shape familiar today, a camera that seems sleeker than the era suggests. To many viewers, the photo felt like proof, a glimpse of someone out of place caught by accident in a moment he shouldn't belong to. but historians later pointed out that every item he wore existed at the time, though perhaps not commonly seen together. What these stories reveal is not gullibility, but something more gentle, the mind's willingness to stretch when presented with mystery. When we see an image that feels out of time, the imagination begins to weave possibilities. When we read about a man making impossible financial predictions, the mind doesn't always rush to refute. It pauses, if only for a moment, to consider what it would feel like if such a thing were true. That pause is where wonder lives. Even when the hoaxes are eventually debunked, the warmth of the story remains. People continue to retell them, not as evidence but as folklore. Digital myths passed from one curious reader to another. They serve as reminders that the human mind is hungry for connections, patterns, and a touch of the extraordinary. And in a world filled with routines and responsibilities, a story that hints at hidden doorways through time can feel like a small breath of cool air. As we move forward, the path naturally leads toward understanding how these stories gain their shape, how a scattering of details, a bit of creative framing, and the soft glow of possibility can create illusions that persist long after the truth is settled. And by looking closely at how hoaxes are built, we come a little closer to understanding why they continue to enchant us. Some stories arrive fully formed, shining with mystery from the moment they appear. Others are crafted, not with malice, but with a strangely gentle precision, as though the creator were spinning a thread of silk and hoping no one would pull too hard on either end. Time travel hoaxes often fall into this second category. They don't burst into existence like fireworks. They unfold the way a soft illusion unfolds on a quiet stage, with careful placement of details, clever use of ambiguity, and just enough familiarity to make the impossible feel as though it could almost be true. And in this way, they reveal as much about the storyteller as they do about the listener. The most convincing hoaxes begin not with the miraculous, but with the ordinary, a detail about a real place, a reference to a recognizable technology, a tone that feels conversational rather than dramatic. These small choices are the anchor stones that keep the story from drifting immediately into disbelief. When someone claims to have stepped through time, they rarely start with cosmic descriptions or glowing doorways. They begin with something quiet, an odd photograph, a strange coincidence, a technical explanation that sounds just familiar enough to disarm skepticism. This familiarity is the first layer of the illusion, the soft foundation on which the rest is built. The second layer is ambiguity. Hoaxes rarely offer crisp, definitive facts. Instead, they leave gentle gaps, like a painting with the edges slightly blurred. These gaps invite the imagination to wander, filling in what isn't said with possibilities. A story that is too detailed often collapses under its own weight, but a story that suggests more than it explains can feel like an open window. People approach it slowly, leaning forward, trying to see what lies just beyond the frame. That leaning, curiosity pulling the mind forward, is where belief begins to stir. This is why hoaxes so often borrow the language of science without actually relying on its structure. They sprinkle in terms that sound technical, but are softened enough to be approachable. Instead of describing equations or measurements, they speak of fields bending, or energy forming a loop, or time flowing differently inside a shell. These phrases don't point to anything concrete, but they carry the gentle aroma of plausibility. When heard aloud, they sound like explanations without demanding that the listener break the spell by asking for proof. It's like using the outline of a key without the teeth, shaped enough to fit the imagination, but not enough to turn the lock. In the case of time travel hoaxes, this pattern becomes even clearer. Someone might describe the machine they used, not in scientific notation, but in everyday imagery. A device that folds space the way you fold a map, or a chamber where time pools briefly like water collecting in a hollow. These descriptions, while imprecise, feel meaningful because they borrow from sensations we already understand. We've all folded paper, watched water swirl, seen heat shimmer above pavement. When impossibilities are described in terms of familiar experiences, the mind begins to relax around the idea instead of resisting it. Then there is the matter of tone. The most enduring hoaxes are rarely loud. They don't shout predictions or declare themselves with a triumphant flourish. They speak with a calm, almost weary humility, as though the storyteller sees no reason to convince anyone. That quiet confidence becomes another layer of plausibility. People lean toward voices that sound steady, gentle, unhurried. A storyteller who doesn't demand belief is often the one who receives it. When someone says, "I don't expect you to accept this, but here is what I've seen," the listener slips into a softer state of receptivity. It feels more like a conversation than a performance. The final ingredient is the emotional hook. Every memorable hoax contains a small ember of feeling, something that warms the imagination. It could be a prediction of a difficult future, shaped just enough like existing fears to feel real. It could be the idea that hidden knowledge exists somewhere, offering guidance or comfort. Or it could be the notion that time is flexible, that mistakes can be revisited, that destinies can shift. These emotional threads entwine with the details of the hoax, forming a tapestry that is less about deception and more about resonance. A story that touches the emotions doesn't need to be verified, it only needs to be felt. But hoaxes don't thrive merely because they are crafted well. They thrive because of the way people share them. A story passes from one person to another, each retelling softening or sharpening certain parts, like a stone that grows smooth in a river over many years. Details shift, interpretations bloom, and before long, the original hoax becomes a kind of collective creation, shaped by hundreds of hands, each adding a shade of belief, doubt, fascination, or reinterpretation. In this sense, hoaxes behave less like lies and more like myths. They are built collectively, evolving through shared curiosity rather than through a single author's intent. What's interesting is that many hoaxes survive even after they've been debunked. Once the threads of wonder and emotion have woven themselves into the story, facts alone rarely unravel them. People may no longer believe the tale is true, but they still carry affection for the feeling it gave them. A debunked hoax doesn't disappear, it simply transforms. It becomes a piece of folklore, a modern legend that reveals the shape of human imagination more clearly than any straightforward account could. And in the quiet of night, when stories feel particularly vivid and thoughts loosen their ties to daylight logic, even a fully discredited hoax can still carry a faint glow. Not because of its truthfulness, but because of what it represented. A possibility, a doorway, a reminder that the universe, as we understand it, may not contain all there is. People don't cling to hoaxes because they desire deception. They cling because they desire wonder. And wonder, even dressed in fiction, can feel like a small gift. As we drift further along this path, examining the threads that hold these illusions together, the next step naturally leads toward understanding not just how these stories are built, but why people are so eager to embrace them. And in that gentle exploration, the emotional core of time travel legends begins to reveal itself, one soft layer at a time. There is something quietly remarkable about the human mind. Long before we built telescopes, computers, or maps of the universe, our ancestors stood beneath the night sky and connected the stars into shapes that were never truly there. A cluster of lights became a hunter, another became a mythical queen. A swirl of faint sparkles became a dragon stretching across the darkness. We were pattern makers before we were anything else, and this gentle tendency, This instinct to stitch meaning into the fabric of the world has stayed with us through every age. Even today, you might pour a spoonful of sugar onto a table and notice that it lands in a way that resembles a constellation. Or you might glance at the clouds drifting overhead and briefly see the outline of a familiar animal before the wind reshapes everything again. These small moments are examples of a phenomenon psychologists call apophenia, but it feels softer to think of it as the mind's habit of finding stories in the fog. We look at randomness and without trying we add form to it, not because we're confused, but because we're beautifully wired to search for meaning. This ability helped early humans survive. When rustling grass could mean a predator hiding nearby, those who noticed patterns, even imagined ones, were more likely to stay alive. Over time, the brain became skilled at interpreting noises, shapes, shadows, and coincidences as signs. And although we no longer depend on interpreting rustling leaves to avoid danger, the habit remains. We still see faces in tree bark, symbols in the arrangement of stones, and significance in moments that may simply be chance brushing past us. When this instinct meets modern life, something interesting happens. The world today is full of information, noisy, scattered, overflowing. Our minds, still longing for patterns, try to weave the chaos into something coherent. A coincidence begins to feel like a message. A repeated number seems meaningful. A strange photograph sparks curiosity. The fog of everyday life becomes a canvas, and our thoughts draw soft lines across it, turning randomness into something that feels intentional. This is part of why time travel hoaxes feel so enticing. When someone posts a grainy image or a curious claim, the mind leans forward, eager to trace connections. It begins to wonder whether the unusual detail in the corner of a photo is a clue. It tries to fit the storyteller's words into a larger frame, one that makes sense of the familiar and the strange. We do not simply consume stories, we participate in them. We try to finish the puzzle even when some of the pieces don't belong to the same set. Another part of our fascination comes from a thing psychologists call confirmation bias, though it feels gentler to describe it as the mind's quiet preference for ideas it already likes. When we feel drawn to a story because it's exciting, mysterious, or comforting, our thoughts begin to orbit around the details that support it. The parts that contradict the story slip to the background like fading echoes. For example, if someone is intrigued by the idea of time travelers, they might notice every coincidence that seems to point toward that possibility, while quietly overlooking the many ordinary explanations that sit nearby. This isn't a flaw, it's simply the mind trying to keep its stories consistent. Humans like coherence. We like narratives where everything fits together. It gives us a sense of stability, especially when life feels unpredictable. So when we encounter a strange story, our minds often do a bit of gentle rearranging, not enough to distort reality completely, but enough to make the edges of the story feel smoother. Consider a simple example. Imagine you wake up thinking of someone you haven't spoken to in years. Later that same day, they send you a message out of the blue. Your mind immediately lights up with the possibility that something meaningful has happened, a hidden connection, a thread weaving through time. But in truth, the coincidence might simply be coincidence. Out of the thousands of thoughts you have each day, a few are bound to align with events purely by chance. Yet when such alignment does happen, it feels intimate, almost magical. Your mind whispers, there must be a reason, and the pattern becomes irresistible. Humans also have a gentle habit of seeking symmetry. When two things happen close together, we want to believe they are linked, like two bells ringing at nearly the same moment. The sound seems harmonized even if the bells are unrelated. This soft desire for connection can sometimes make hoaxes seem more plausible than they are. When a story about a time traveler includes predictions that vaguely resemble real events, people begin to weave the two together. The resemblance becomes a thread, the thread becomes a tapestry, and soon the tapestry feels too carefully woven to dismiss outright. Even the way we remember things contributes to this process. Memory is not a perfect recording. It is more like a quilt stitched from fragments, impressions, and emotions. When something mysterious enters our experience, the mind rearranges certain memories to create a smoother explanation. We fill in gaps without realizing it, the way someone telling a bedtime story might embellish a detail or adjust a timeline so the tale feels more complete. These small creative touches make memories feel richer, but they also make hoaxes easier to believe. Yet there's something tender, even beautiful about this pattern-hungry nature. It shows that we long for meaning. We yearn to understand the world not as a raw sequence of events, but as something shaped by connection, intention, and quiet significance. Even when we know a story might not be true, the part of us that looks for patterns still leans toward wonder. This instinct becomes even more noticeable in times of uncertainty. When the world feels confusing or overwhelming, the mind begins searching with extra intensity, trying to weave the scattered pieces of experience into something reassuring. A strange photograph, an ambiguous headline, an odd coincidence, each becomes an opportunity to make sense of the fog. And even if the resulting explanation isn't correct, it can feel comforting, like a lantern glowing softly in a dark room. As we move deeper into this exploration, it becomes clear that pattern seeking is not merely a quirk. It is one of the fundamental ways the mind makes sense of existence. It is the lens through which we navigate both the ordinary and the extraordinary. And when this lens meets stories that stretch the boundaries of reality, such as tales of travellers stepping between centuries, something inside us stirs, a mixture of curiosity and longing that feels uniquely human. With this gentle understanding, we can now drift toward a related question. If our minds are wired to find meaning, how do the different ways we think influence the stories we embrace? In that soft inquiry lies the beginning of another quiet layer in our journey through time, imagination, and belief. There is a moment, quiet and almost invisible, when your mind first encounters a new idea. Before you decide whether it makes sense, before you weigh the evidence, before you ask any questions, there is a soft flicker of response. Sometimes it feels like a gentle nod from somewhere deep inside, a wordless yes that arrives without effort. Other times the mind leans back slightly, hesitant, waiting for more. These early responses come from two different ways of thinking, two modes that live together within you like neighbouring rooms in the same house, the intuitive mind and the analytical mind. The intuitive mind is the quick whisper. It moves lightly, quietly, almost like the flick of a candle flame when air shifts in the room. It is the part of you that senses patterns before you fully notice them, the part that draws conclusions based on feelings, impressions, and the subtle music of experience. When someone tells you a story, especially one filled with mystery or possibility, this part of the mind listens with open curiosity. It doesn't need much detail. It responds to atmosphere, tone, imagery. It cares about how the story feels. The analytical mind, on the other hand, is the slow lantern. It lights the path one careful step at a time. This is the part of you that prefers clarity, structure, and explanations that fit neatly into place. It asks questions. It examines details. It tries to hold a story up to the light, turning it gently to see whether any part of it casts a suspicious shadow. It moves more slowly, but not because it is stubborn. Its pace is simply deliberate, like someone reading the fine print on a map before setting out on a journey. Both ways of thinking are valuable. The intuitive mind gives colour to the world, helping you sense meaning in subtle experiences. The analytical mind gives shape to the world, helping you understand how things connect. Most people use both all the time, letting their thoughts drift between instinct and reasoning in a soft, natural rhythm. When you make a quick decision, choosing a seat on a bus or sensing a mood in the room, you're listening to intuition. When you make a careful plan, checking schedules, estimating time, weighing pros and cons, you're leaning on analysis. Neither is better, neither is worse. They simply serve different purposes. But when it comes to extraordinary stories, especially stories about time travel, the two minds respond differently. The intuitive mind is drawn to wonder. Tell it about a traveller who stepped through years as easily as someone stepping through a doorway, and it immediately begins imagining the scent of the air in that distant time, the colour of the sky, the sound of voices speaking in unfamiliar rhythms. It is enchanted by possibility, the soft idea that the universe might hold secrets not yet revealed. Even if a story doesn't fully add up, intuition enjoys its shape, the way you might enjoy a painting without needing to understand the geometry behind it. The analytical mind, meanwhile, listens more cautiously. It notices details that don't quite align. It wonders how the traveller returned. It considers whether the predictions match events that actually happened. It examines the machinery described in the story and tries gently to imagine whether such a device could exist without bending the laws of physics beyond recognition. Yet even as it questions, the analytical mind is not necessarily dismissive. It simply wants to understand. It seeks coherence, the way someone might untangle a knot not out of impatience, but out of a desire to see the thread clearly. When a hoax appears, it often appeals first to intuition. The story is shaped to feel intriguing, atmospheric, just plausible enough to spark curiosity. The intuitive mind leans forward, gathering the emotional essence of the tale, but the analytical mind soon awakens, examining the pieces more closely. Sometimes it finds soft footholds, a lack of detail here, a clever distraction there, or predictions that remain vague enough to fit many outcomes. Other times it lingers in uncertainty, unsure whether to accept or reject. This interplay between intuition and analysis is part of why hoaxes are so compelling. They engage both forms of thinking, each in their own way. What's particularly interesting is how the two minds can influence each other. If intuition is strongly drawn to a story because it feels hopeful, comforting, or mysterious, it may encourage the analytical mind to be more forgiving, smoothing over inconsistencies. On the other hand, if the analytical mind pushes back early, highlighting gaps or contradictions, intuition may quiet down, allowing skepticism to take the lead. Neither reaction is inherently correct. They are simply different responses shaped by personal experience, emotion, and cognitive style. Some people lean more naturally toward intuition. They make decisions based on hunches, feelings, or subtle impressions that others might overlook. They may find joy in ambiguous stories, enjoying the space left open for imagination to wander. Others lean more toward analysis, seeking clarity and understanding before they allow themselves to engage emotionally. They enjoy stories too, but prefer when the threads are woven tightly without loose ends. But these tendencies aren't fixed. They shift depending on mood, environment, and what the mind needs at a particular moment. Late at night, when the room is quiet and the world feels softer, intuition often rises, filling the mind with gentle images and possibilities. During the busy hours of the day, analysis tends to take the lead, organising tasks and navigating responsibilities. Both are useful. Both protect you in their own way. Time travel hoaxes sit in a delicate zone between these two ways of thinking. They are built to feel emotionally compelling, inviting the intuitive mind to drift through what-ifs. But they also include the faint outline of logic, the kind that invites the analytical mind to participate without being overwhelmed by technical detail. This balance is why such stories spread so easily. They don't just entertain, they harmonize with the dual structure of human thought. Ultimately, understanding these two modes of thinking is not about choosing one over the other. It's about recognizing how they shape your experience of the world. The intuitive mind helps you feel the beauty of possibility. The analytical mind helps you navigate the structure of reality. Together, they create the inner landscape through which you walk each day. And as we continue this journey, exploring why extraordinary stories offer comfort, and why the mind sometimes prefers mystery to certainty, these two thinking styles will continue to accompany us, one whispering gently, the other holding a small lantern, both guiding us through the fog of wonder. There are days when the world feels a little heavier than usual, days when the air carries too much noise, when responsibilities stretch thin across your thoughts, or when the simple act of keeping up with time itself feels like a quiet weight pressing against your shoulders. On days like these, the mind reaches, almost instinctively, for something softer, something gentler, something that lifts the heaviness just enough to let you breathe again. And often, what it reaches for is not the strictly realistic, but the wonderfully impossible. Strange stories. Stories of travellers stepping across centuries, of messages appearing from futures that never came to be, of doorways hidden in ordinary rooms, hold a special kind of comfort. They exist outside the boundaries of your daily life, unburdened by deadlines or expectations. They offer a momentary escape from the world's harsher edges, inviting you to drift through possibility rather than obligation. And when the mind is tired, this invitation feels almost like a warm hand guiding you into a quieter room. Psychologists sometimes describe escapism as a coping mechanism, but that phrase sounds too clinical for something so deeply human. It may be more accurate to imagine it as building a small nest of comfort around uncertainty. When life feels unpredictable, the mind brings forward stories that stretch beyond the everyday. Stories where rules bend, where time softens, where the unknown becomes a place of curiosity rather than fear. Time travel tales sit at the centre of this emotional impulse, because few ideas capture the feeling of possibility more perfectly than the idea of moving freely through time. Think of what time travel represents emotionally. It is the fantasy of control in a world that rarely offers it. It is the idea that regrets can be revisited, that mistakes can be softened, that loss can be approached with a gentler understanding. It is the suggestion that the future is not a wall but a window, something you can look through, something that might be kinder than you expect. For a moment, imagining such things doesn't erase your worries, but it wraps them in a softer texture, like fabric placed over a sharp edge. There is a reason these fantasies flourish in moments of stress. When the world feels overwhelming, the mind instinctively begins to widen its internal horizon, searching for something that makes the present more bearable. Extraordinary stories function as psychological lanterns. They don't remove the fog of uncertainty, but they give you something warm to hold while you walk through it. A tale about time bending, for example, can feel like a reminder that the world is larger and stranger than whatever is troubling you in the moment. Even if the story is fictional, even if you know it is fictional, it offers relief. This is similar to the way people find comfort in imagining different versions of their own lives. When someone thinks, what if I had chosen differently? What if that moment had gone another way? They're not necessarily wishing to rewrite the past. They're creating a sense of possibility. They're soothing the quiet ache of wondering whether everything had to unfold exactly as it did. Time travel stories take that instinct and turn it into a landscape you can walk through, a place where alternate outcomes feel close enough to touch. In this way, the extraordinary becomes a gentle sanctuary. When you imagine a world where time can be revisited, where futures can be glimpsed, where past moments can be understood with new eyes, you're not escaping reality. You're giving your mind space to breathe so it can return to reality more calmly. These imaginative detours function like a deep exhale. They loosen the knots of worry, allowing your thoughts to settle like dust floating slowly to the ground in a quiet room. Even stories that lean toward the mysterious or eerie can feel strangely comforting. A traveller appearing from nowhere, a photograph containing something out of place, a message found on an old machine, each offers the same promise, that life is not as narrowly defined as it seems, that somewhere beyond the ordinary rhythm of days there may be hidden layers, hidden moments, hidden possibilities. This sense of spaciousness can bring real emotional relief. It reminds you that even when your own life feels constrained, the imagination is not. Interestingly, the comfort doesn't depend on believing the story is true. Many people who enjoy time travel hoaxes know perfectly well that they are inventions. The comfort comes not from the content of the story, but from the space the story creates, a space that feels safe, boundless, and gently illuminated. It's like stepping into a warm bath at the end of a long day. The water doesn't change the world outside the room, but it changes how your body holds the day's tension. In the same way, extraordinary stories soften the mind's tightness and allow it to float. And there is another layer to this comfort, the sense that the impossible carries no demands. Real life requires decisions, effort, responsibility. But a story about time travel asks nothing from you. You don't need to act on it, evaluate it, or fix anything related to it. You simply drift through it. It's a rare kind of freedom, the freedom to imagine without consequence. In a world filled with choices and pressure, this is a precious release. Most importantly, extraordinary stories offer emotional control over uncontrollable situations. When life feels unpredictable, imagining a world where time itself can be negotiated gives a sense of symbolic mastery. It's not real, but the feeling is real. And feelings, especially the soft ones that help us rest, often matter more than strict accuracy. So when someone clings to a strange tale, or finds solace in a story of a traveller moving through years, it isn't naivety, it's human. It's the mind responding to stress by expanding instead of collapsing, by imagining instead of constricting, by seeking wonder instead of turning inward in fear. And as we follow this thread, a thread woven from comfort, possibility, and gentle escapism, it naturally leads us toward another deeply human instinct, the desire not just to imagine alone, but to imagine with others. Because even wonder feels warmer when shared, and in those shared spaces communities form, offering connection through mystery. There's a particular warmth that settles into the mind when you share a story with someone else. It can be a story from childhood, a dream you had the night before, or a strange little mystery you stumbled upon when you weren't looking for anything unusual at all. Something shifts when another person leans in, listening with the same curiosity you feel. The story becomes more alive, not because the facts change, but because someone else is carrying part of the wonder with you. In that shared moment, a sense of belonging quietly forms, soft and unspoken. Time travel hoaxes, interestingly, grow in just this way, not through evidence but through companionship. Across the internet, in small corners of forums, chat rooms, and social threads, groups of people gather to talk about Chrononauts, the travellers who supposedly slipped into our timeline from distant futures or forgotten pasts. These communities often begin with a single post or an unusual photograph, Someone shares it, not with authority, but with a gentle sense of, "Look at this. What do you think?" Another person responds, then another, and slowly a circle forms. Not a circle of believers in the strict sense, but a circle of people who enjoy wondering together. This kind of shared curiosity is a kind of modern campfire. Instead of flickering flames, there are glowing screens. Instead of sparks rising into the night, there are messages drifting through digital space. But the feeling is eerily similar. A circle of people leaning inward, letting imagination stretch into places everyday life rarely allows. These digital gatherings form not because the story's true, but because the act of exploring them together feels comforting. It might seem unusual that people would bond over something as improbable as time travel, but mystery has always been a powerful social glue. When something cannot be fully explained, when it hovers in that soft region between possibility and impossibility, it creates a space where no one must be an expert. No one must hold all the answers. In that shared uncertainty, people feel free to speculate, dream, and offer interpretations without fear of being wrong. The story becomes a communal puzzle that no one expects to solve, only to explore. These communities often develop their own traditions. Someone archives old posts, another maps out timelines, someone else finds obscure details in photographs and offers interpretations, half serious and half playful. There are debates, but even the debates feel gentle, as though everyone understands they are participating in something that exists more for enjoyment than resolution. The point isn't to decide whether a time traveller truly stepped into our world. The point is the togetherness formed while discussing it. And yet, the emotional warmth that emerges in these groups goes beyond simple entertainment. For many people, daily life can feel fragmented. Work, stress, responsibilities, and the busy churn of modern society can make it difficult to find communities built around curiosity instead of productivity. In contrast, these circles of wonder offer something rare, a place where people gather not to argue or accomplish, but to share a soft sense of awe. In this way, the allure of time travel hoaxes becomes intertwined with the desire to connect. When someone posts a photo that looks a little out of place, perhaps a woman in an unexpected outfit standing in a crowd from decades ago, or a man holding an object that seems too modern for the era, it invites not just questions but conversation. People discuss lighting, shadows, clothing styles, camera angles. They trade theories. They share small discoveries. It becomes an exercise in collaborative imagination. Even when someone gently points out a rational explanation, the tone is often kind. These communities rarely fall into the harsh skepticism seen in other corners of the internet. Instead, skepticism is delivered like a soft blanket placed over the story, rather than a cold bucket of water thrown onto it. The aim is not to debunk, but to explore. Even the skeptics play a role, helping others navigate the mystery without dissolving its charm. Another reason these communities feel comforting is that they offer a sense of identity. Not in the heavy way some groups do, but in a light, whimsical sense. A person might think, I'm someone who enjoys strange stories, I'm someone who wonders about the unknown. This identity is gentle, but it's enough to create a feeling of belonging. It reminds people that there are others in the world who find joy in the same quiet moments of curiosity. Some community members share personal stories too, times when they encountered something odd, or moments when coincidence felt too precise to ignore. These stories are rarely grand or dramatic. They are small, intimate events, a childhood memory, a strange dream, a photograph that seemed unusual for reasons no one could quite explain. Sharing these experiences is a way of saying, here is something that made me wonder. Maybe you'll wonder too. As stories overlap and discussions grow, a subtle camaraderie forms. It's not built on certainty or shared belief, but on shared fascination. And fascination is powerful. It connects people across continents, languages, and time zones. In a world where many interactions feel rushed or transactional, these small, wonder-driven communities become safe spaces. They hold space for imagination, something adults are often told to set aside in favour of practicality. But here, imagination is welcomed like an old friend. Perhaps the most touching part of these communities is that they exist even when everyone knows, deep down, that the hoaxes are unlikely to be real. The magic lies not in believing the story, but in exploring it together. The togetherness is the story. And in that togetherness, people find comfort, connection, and a short break from the noise of the world. As this circle of shared imagination glows softly in the background, it leads naturally to a broader reflection. Why do these stories spread so easily, leaping from one mind to the next like sparks carried by a slow wind? And what happens when the tools that shape our world, especially digital ones, amplify those sparks into something even more powerful? That quiet question opens the path toward the forest of whispers that is the modern digital landscape, where stories travel faster than ever, and where the boundary between truth and imagination becomes as soft as mist. If you imagine the internet not as cables and servers, but as a living landscape, it resembles a vast forest, one without boundaries, where trees stretch endlessly in every direction. Some trees are old, gnarled, and deeply rooted, like long-established forums. Others are young saplings, freshly planted in the form of new posts, new channels, or newly created groups. And moving between these trees is a kind of digital wind, soft, restless, always shifting. This wind carries stories the way real wind carries seeds, scattering them across the landscape, some falling quietly to the ground, others taking root and growing in places no one would expect. Time travel hoaxes often move through this forest with surprising ease. They drift between branches, settle briefly in patches of sunlight, then rise again as someone new discovers them. To understand why these stories spread so widely, it helps to picture the mechanics of virality not as a technical process, but as a natural one, like the way ripples expand across a lake after a single pebble drops into the water. It begins with a spark, a photograph that looks a little odd, a person recounting a strange encounter, an old newspaper clipping resurfaced after decades of forgetting. Alone, none of these things hold much power, but when the digital wind carries them from one person to another, the story begins to take shape. Each person adds something, a thought, an interpretation, a question, like a leaf falling onto a growing pile. The pile might remain small, barely noticed, or it might reach a tipping point where the story becomes weighty enough to draw attention on its own. This tipping point is where ambiguity plays its strongest role. People often imagine that clear, detailed stories are the ones that spread easily, but in truth it is the uncertain ones, the ones with blurry edges that travel farthest. A vague detail invites curiosity. A half-explained image invites interpretation. A mystery with no firm conclusion encourages people to lean in, searching for meaning. In the forest of the internet, ambiguity acts like a breeze stirring the branches, encouraging the leaves of conversation to rustle and spread. One of the forces behind this spreading is something we might call the recaption effect. Imagine an old photograph resting quietly in an archive somewhere, gathering digital dust. Then one day, someone attaches a new caption to it. Evidence of a time traveller spotted in 1943. The image is the same, but the meaning has changed. It's like taking a familiar path in the woods and suddenly placing a lantern beside it. The light shifts the shadows, making the path feel new again. Others see the newly captioned image, and without knowing its original context, they react to the version presented to them. Some believe it, some doubt it, some share it simply because it made them pause for a moment. With each share, the caption gains a little more weight, like a story whispered from branch to branch until the forest itself hums with it. Another reason these stories spread is that the internet shortens the distance between minds. In earlier centuries, a rumour might take weeks or months to travel from one village to another, changing shape as it passed from voice to voice. Today, a single rumour can reach thousands of people in seconds. That speed creates an illusion of momentum. When we see a story repeated many times, the repetition itself feels like validation, even when the content is unchanged. It's the digital equivalent of hearing the same whisper echo through many trees. Eventually, it begins to sound like more than a whisper. The emotional tone of the story also plays a part. Time travel hoaxes are rarely frightening. Instead, they stir gentle curiosity, a soft sense of what if. In the digital forest, stories that evoke wonder travel farther than those that evoke fear. Wonder is like warm sunlight. It draws people out of their routines, encouraging them to explore. Fear, by contrast, makes people retreat. And so, wandering stories drift more freely, carried by the breeze of shared imagination. Another subtle factor is the anonymity of the internet. When someone encounters a mysterious photo or an uncertain claim, they may feel freer to express curiosity than they would in face-to-face conversation. They don't have to worry about seeming naive or overly imaginative. The online space becomes a safe clearing where people can question, ponder, and speculate without judgment. And when people feel safe to wonder, stories grow. Of course, there's a gentle irony in all of this. The internet is filled with tools designed to uncover truth. Fact-checking databases, archived documents, analytical discussions, but at the same time, it is the perfect environment for myths to thrive. It provides both the roots and the wind, the soil and the sky. A story can be debunked within minutes, yet continue spreading for years, simply because it resonates emotionally. Facts may stop a story from growing upward, but they rarely stop it from spreading sideways. This horizontal spreading is important. In the digital forest, a hoax doesn't need to be tall like a tree to have an impact. It can move like a vine, creeping quietly across the forest floor, intertwining with other stories, shaping paths people walk without them even realizing it. And while this may sound worrisome, there is a gentler side to it. The spread of such stories reminds us of something deeply human, our shared attraction to wonder. When millions of people pause at the same strange image or curious claim, even if only for a moment, it reveals a collective longing. A longing for mystery, for meaning, for the possibility that the world still holds secrets around its edges. As we continue drifting deeper into this landscape, the next layer naturally reveals itself. In a world where stories spread so quickly and softly, what happens when technology becomes capable of shaping not only the tales, but the evidence itself? What happens when even images, the anchors of our perception, can be reshaped like clay in warm hands? That question carries us into the next part of our journey, where imagination and technology intertwine in ways both fascinating and quietly unsettling. There is a particular comfort in believing our eyes. Photographs have long held a quiet authority, offering a still image of reality that feels solid, dependable, and true. For more than a century, a photograph was like a small time capsule, capturing a moment so precisely that even decades later, someone far removed from that moment could look at it and feel connected to the world it once held. But as the digital forest grew denser, something subtle began to change. The leaves that once whispered stories of genuine moments now sometimes carry illusions shaped with exquisite precision. Illusions woven not by storytellers with cameras but by algorithms that learn, adjust, and reshape the world pixel by pixel. Artificial intelligence, especially in its modern forms, has given rise to something both fascinating and unsettling: deepfakes. The word itself sounds harsh, almost mechanical, but the phenomenon can be imagined more softly. A deepfake is like a sculpture made from warm clay, a face moulded, a voice reshaped, a moment recreated. Except instead of hands working the clay, it is a program, learning the curves and shadows of a person's features, memorizing the rhythm of their expressions, and then crafting something new that looks convincing enough to fool even a careful observer. For many people, seeing a deepfake for the first time feels like encountering a duplicate of reality. The mind pauses, caught between recognition and doubt. It is like hearing an echo that sounds a little too perfect, or seeing a reflection in water that appears almost sharper than the thing being reflected. The image feels real because it uses the same brushstrokes as reality: light, texture, expression. But the final picture is a story, not a moment. This soft blurring of truth and invention is particularly relevant when it comes to stories about time travel, because deepfakes allow anyone, anywhere, to create evidence that looks persuasive. The boundary between the extraordinary and the fabricated becomes harder to see. A person could place a modern figure into an old photograph, adjusting shadows and grain until the result looks indistinguishable from a genuine historical snapshot. Another could create a video of someone making claims about the future, their voice and expressions shaped entirely by code. In a world where images and voices can be manufactured with such subtle detail, the mind's old reliance on seeing is believing begins to loosen. But this shift isn't just technical, it is emotional. When the world contains illusions that look real, the sense of certainty we once held begins to soften. It's as if we're walking through a familiar room, only to find some of the furniture slightly rearranged each time we blink. The room is still recognizable, but it no longer feels fixed. This fluidity can be unsettling in daylight hours, when clarity feels necessary. Yet in the gentle quiet of night, it can also feel strangely dreamlike. The boundaries between truth and imagination blend the way twilight blends day and night. The ease with which these digital illusions spread contributes to the effect. Once created, a deep fake drifts into the forest of the internet effortlessly. A user shares it on a forum, someone else reposts it with a caption, and soon the image has travelled farther than its creator ever intended. People pause, wonder, debate. Some recognise the illusion immediately, others hesitate, sensing something slightly off but unable to articulate what. Still others believe it wholeheartedly, not because they lack discernment, but because the image speaks to something inside them: curiosity, hope, fear, or simply the desire for something extraordinary. The technology behind deepfakes is often described with complex formulas and terms like layered neural networks or pattern-based synthesis, but it can be understood more gently. Imagine a painter who studies thousands of faces, learning the subtle movements of muscles, the delicate interplay of light on skin, the way eyes shift when someone smiles. Over time, the painter becomes so skilled that they can create a new face. A face that looks real, feels real, but belongs to no one. This painter is not a person. It is a program taught to replicate what it sees. And because it doesn't tire, hesitate, or forget, it can create with astonishing accuracy. This ability is powerful, but power itself is neutral. It becomes meaningful only in how it is used. Some artists use deepfake technology to create imaginative worlds. blending familiar faces into fictional places. Some filmmakers use it to restore old footage, giving new breath to long-lost moments. Others use it to explore creative expressions that would have been impossible in earlier decades. These uses reflect humanity's endless capacity for wonder. But the same tools can be used to mislead. A single convincing image can ignite rumours. A fabricated video can stir confusion. Even when debunked, these illusions leave traces in the collective imagination like footprints in soft ground. People remember the feeling the image gave them, the brief spark of wonder or worry, even long after they know it wasn't true. Emotion lingers where facts fade. This lingering effect is why deepfakes intertwine so naturally with time travel hoaxes. They provide the perfect canvas for stories that slip between reality and imagination. A modern photo altered to look like it came from the past. A historical figure given a new expression, as if reacting to something impossible. A scene from decades ago populated with people who were never there. In each case, the mind is invited into a small moment of uncertainty, and uncertainty is fertile soil for wonder. Yet despite all this, there is a gentle wisdom in remembering that not every illusion is dangerous. Sometimes illusions exist simply because humans enjoy creating them, because the act of making something impossible feel almost real is itself a form of play, a way of interacting with the world not through strict accuracy, but through imagination. And even when the illusions are meant to deceive, the presence of skepticism, curiosity, and shared discussion acts as a lantern guiding us through the shadows. In the end, deepfakes remind us of something timeless, that the line between story and reality has never been completely solid. Humans have always crafted myths, tales, and visions that hovered at the edge of truth. The tools may have changed, clay replaced by pixels, paint replaced by algorithms, but the impulse remains the same. We are storytellers by nature, shaping the world not only through what we see, but through what we dream. And as we move forward, carrying this awareness with us, we begin to step into a quieter, more introspective question. What does it mean to live in a world where so many stories, true or not, compete for our attention? How does trust shift, soften, or erode when anything can be made to look real? That question gently leads us to the next part of our journey, where the emotional landscape of trust becomes as delicate as a ripple moving across still water. There is a particular kind of tiredness that settles into the mind, not the tiredness that comes from lack of sleep, but the one that comes from too much uncertainty. A gentle weariness that forms when the world feels like a puzzle with shifting pieces, when the things you once trusted to stay steady begin to move just enough to make you question your footing. In this era of digital illusions, altered images and stories travelling faster than truth can catch them, many people find themselves living in what feels like a post-truth aquarium, a place where reality is visible but slightly distorted, as though seen through rippling water. In such an environment, trust begins to thin, not all at once, not dramatically, but quietly, the way a slow leak empties a basin drop by drop. A person comes across a photograph that looks real but isn't. They watch a video that seems genuine until someone points out it was created by an algorithm. They read a headline only to discover it was crafted to provoke rather than inform. None of these moments is enough to break trust entirely, but each one loosens a small thread. Eventually, the tapestry feels less secure. This gentle unravelling influences how people interpret extraordinary stories, especially those involving time travel. When everything feels potentially fabricated, the impossible begins to seem no more unlikely than anything else. The mind drifts into a fog where truth and fiction sit side by side, indistinguishable without careful attention. And yet, paradoxically, this fog can make mysterious stories more appealing. If certainty feels out of reach, then curiosity becomes a refuge, Wonder becomes a soft place to rest when facts feel slippery. One of the reasons trust erodes slowly rather than abruptly is that the modern world delivers information in layers: headlines, comments, captions, edited clips, snapshots taken out of context. Each layer touches only a narrow slice of reality. It's like trying to understand a forest by looking at a handful of leaves. You might sense something about the whole, but the full picture remains elusive. This fragmentation creates an environment where stories, especially dramatic ones, can flourish simply because people crave something coherent in place of scattered fragments. In this fragmented space, people often turn inward, relying more heavily on their own interpretations, impressions, and personal experiences. Instead of asking, "Is this true?" they begin asking, "Does this feel true?" And feelings, gentle as they are, can be shaped by loneliness, hope, anxiety, nostalgia. A person longing for excitement may find themselves drawn to extraordinary claims. Someone feeling overwhelmed may find comfort in stories that suggest hidden order in chaos. Someone feeling disconnected may seek community in places where shared fascination becomes a form of belonging. This shift from external trust to internal resonance creates a subtle vulnerability. When people choose stories based on how they feel rather than how they function in reality, hoaxes gain a foothold, not because they are convincing in a strict sense, but because they speak to emotional needs. They become soft lanterns in uncertain times, but even skepticism, when stretched too far, becomes its own kind of darkness. If you begin to question everything, even the ordinary starts to feel uncertain. A real photograph might look staged. A genuine testimony might sound rehearsed. A simple coincidence might feel orchestrated. This hypervigilance wears on the mind, creating a fatigue that makes it difficult to distinguish genuine caution from excessive doubt. In this state of fatigue, the world can start to feel like a room filled with shifting shadows, shadows cast by real things, by imagined things, and by things transformed by the glow of digital tools. The mind tries to navigate the room carefully, but the boundaries blur, and the effort itself becomes exhausting. And so, people often retreat into smaller, more manageable spaces, communities where they feel grounded, narratives they trust, voices that sound familiar. These retreats provide comfort, but also create bubbles where alternative realities can flourish. The erosion of trust also affects how people interact with science. In earlier times, scientific discoveries arrived slowly, like ships appearing on the horizon. There was time to absorb them, discuss them, and understand them. Today, new findings arrive like raindrops in a storm. Too many and too quickly for anyone to hold on to each one. And when scientific knowledge is delivered in rapid bursts mixed with speculation, misinterpretation, and outright fabrication, even well-founded ideas can feel uncertain. This doesn't mean people stop believing in science. Rather, they begin to pick and choose which parts feel reassuring. Some gravitate towards stories of cosmic grandeur, black holes, multiverses, ancient stars, because these feel beautifully distant. Others cling to theories that support their emotional landscapes. Curiosity remains alive, but it becomes selective, shaped by personal comfort rather than universal coherence. Still, despite all these challenges, trust does not disappear completely. Humans are remarkably resilient. The mind, even when confused, continues searching for reliable anchors. People find solace in small certainties, the steadiness of their own breath, the reliability of simple routines, the comfort of relationships built on genuine presence. These become touchstones in an environment where information flickers like candlelight. Perhaps the most important realization in this era is that trust is not a rigid object. It is a living thing. It bends, adjusts, rebuilds itself. When shaken, it does not shatter, it reshapes. People learn to ask better questions. They learn to check sources gently rather than cynically. They learn to rely on communities that value clarity instead of noise. And in doing so, trust becomes more grounded, not because the world becomes simpler, but because people become wiser in how they navigate it. And as we carry this understanding with us, the journey naturally begins to turn toward a softer horizon. How do we keep our wonder alive without losing our footing? How do we embrace the extraordinary gently, responsibly, without letting the fog of uncertainty pull us too far away from what keeps us grounded? Those questions form the beginning of the next chapter in our exploration, where curiosity and clarity meet in the same quiet breath. There is a gentle art in being able to hold wonder in one hand and steadiness in the other. Most of the time, we feel pulled toward one side or the other, either drifting fully into imagination, letting the world shimmer with possibility, or anchoring ourselves so firmly in what is verifiable that the soft edges of mystery begin to fade. But somewhere between these two extremes lies a quieter middle ground, a place where curiosity and grounding coexist like two lanterns, casting light from opposite ends of the same room. Humans have always lived in this tension. Our ancestors gazed at the stars, imagining gods, spirits, or ancestors watching over them. Yet they also learned to map the sky, noticing patterns that helped them predict seasons, migrations, and weather. They held myth and observation side by side without conflict. To them, wonder was not the opposite of knowledge. It was the companion of knowledge, something that made the world feel not smaller through understanding but deeper. Today, this balance is hard to maintain. The world rushes at us with information, much of it dazzling, much of it confusing. Facts compete with fiction, entertainment mixes with evidence, and the extraordinary sometimes appears more accessible than the ordinary. In this swirl, embracing mystery responsibly becomes its own kind of gentle discipline. The first step in this balance is recognizing that wonder itself is not dangerous. Wonder is simply the mind stretching. It is the soft widening of perspective that comes when you encounter something beyond your habits and routines. A person can hold a story about time travel, for example, in the same way they hold a dream, appreciating its emotional resonance without insisting on its literal truth. This is not dishonesty. It is a form of imaginative play, a way of exploring possibilities without confusing them with reality. Think of wonder as a small bird perched on your shoulder. If you clutch it too tightly, trying to make it stay forever, it becomes afraid and fragile. If you ignore it entirely, it flies away. But if you let it rest lightly, it becomes a companion, settling, lifting off, returning whenever the mind finds itself in a gentle, receptive state. Holding mystery lightly also means staying aware of life's grounding points. While the imagination wanders through tales of travellers stepping across centuries, a part of you remains connected to the steady things, your breath, your routines, the small certainties that steady the days. These simple anchors prevent wonder from becoming overwhelming. They remind you that, no matter how far your mind drifts, reality remains soft beneath your feet. Another way to stay grounded is by practicing a gentle form of skepticism. Not the harsh kind that dismisses everything unfamiliar, but the kind that asks questions with a calm, curious tone. Instead of rejecting a strange story outright, you might ask, "What makes this appealing?" Or, "What part of this feels true in a symbolic way?" This approach doesn't shut down imagination. It guides it, giving it a sense of direction while still allowing it to roam freely. This gentle skepticism is like walking through a forest with a lantern. You don't shine the light harshly into every shadow, demanding clarity. You simply let it illuminate the path enough to keep you from stumbling. The shadows are still there, and they enrich the journey, but they are no longer intimidating. A helpful practice is to separate emotional truth from factual truth. An emotionally true story might not have literally happened, but it reveals something about fear, hope, or longing. For instance, a tale of a traveller from the future might not offer scientific evidence, but it might reflect a collective wish for guidance during uncertain times. A photograph said to show someone out of place might speak to our desire to believe that life still contains hidden doorways. In these ways, symbolic truth becomes just as meaningful as factual truth, offering comfort without misleading us. There is also a kind of humility in accepting that the world is both knowable and unknowable. Science illuminates many corners of existence, but there are still vast expanses we cannot see. Cosmic distances, unmeasured depths of consciousness, the quiet secrets of the natural world. Acknowledging this duality allows you to appreciate wonder without feeling the need to resolve every question. You can let the unknown remain softly unknown. This approach doesn't diminish the joy of extraordinary stories. In fact, it enhances them. When you allow yourself to drift into a tale of time loops, alternate timelines, or messages from distant futures while still knowing it is a story, the experience becomes sweeter. You can enjoy the emotional journey without being tangled in the need for evidence. It becomes like listening to music, something felt, not analysed. Holding wonder responsibly also strengthens resilience. When the world becomes confusing, when contradictory information swirls, when trust feels shaken, you can return to this balance. The stories you enjoy don't become anchors of belief. They become cushions of comfort. And facts don't become harsh blades. They become guideposts. In this balance, you move through uncertainty with a kind of quiet grace. Perhaps the most important part of maintaining this harmony is practicing gentleness with yourself. When the mind leaps toward wonder, you can smile and let it travel. When it pulls back towards skepticism, you can let that happen too. Both impulses are natural, both are human. There is no need to scold yourself for believing too easily or for doubting too quickly. You are navigating a complex world with a brain beautifully designed to think, feel, imagine, and question all at once. As this understanding settles into place, it opens a soft pathway toward the next part of our journey. If holding mystery lightly is the first step, then how do we navigate the vast sea of information with clarity and calm? How do we check the truth of a story without dimming the light of curiosity? Those answers lie ahead, waiting quietly like pages turning in a book you're not yet ready to close. There's a common misunderstanding that fact-checking must be sharp, demanding, or confrontational, as though the only way to verify truth is by brandishing logic like a sword. But in reality, fact-checking can be something much gentler, more like adjusting a dim lamp to see the room a little more clearly, or brushing dust from a window so the light can pass through. It can be a soft skill practiced quietly, without extinguishing the warm candle of curiosity that makes extraordinary stories so appealing in the first place. In a world where information arrives in quick, glittering fragments, headlines, posts, images, clips, fact-checking begins with a very simple step: slowing down, not to a halt, not to suspicion, but to a pace that lets your thoughts breathe. When you encounter a surprising claim or a mysterious photograph, pausing for a moment creates a gentle space between the story and your reaction. This pause is like a small clearing in a forest, allowing you to see the path rather than rushing through the brush. From this soft pause, the next step is asking calm questions. Questions that don't challenge the story aggressively, but simply explore its shape. Questions like, where did this come from? When did it first appear? Who is sharing it? These are not interrogations. They are invitations for the story to reveal a little more of itself. Often, simply tracing a story backward, even a few steps, helps illuminate whether it was born from evidence, imagination, or something in between. One of the most soothing and practical fact-checking habits is learning to look for original sources. In the digital world, stories often travel like feathers in the wind, drifting from one person to another, picking up bits of meaning that weren't there at the start. A photograph might be shared with a thrilling new caption, even though the caption did not belong to the image originally. By following the trail back to its first appearance, you can sometimes discover that the story began as satire, or an art project, or a misunderstood detail. This process doesn't harm the joy of wonder. It simply sets the story gently on the right shelf. Another soft approach is comparing information instead of arguing with it. When you see a claim, you might look for another version of the same event or moment. Not to prove someone wrong, but to gather a fuller picture. It's like hearing 2 or 3 musicians play the same melody. Each gives you more insight into the tune. When multiple sources tell the same story independently, confidence grows naturally. When they contradict one another openly, the fog begins to clear, and the story reveals its true nature. Fact-checking also becomes easier when you pay attention to tone. Stories crafted to manipulate emotions often feel urgent or dramatic, like someone knocking loudly on your door. Meanwhile, dependable information usually speaks in a calmer voice, offering details without pushing you toward a conclusion. When a story tries very hard to make you feel fear, anger, or excitement, it's worth slowing down even more. A story that's true rarely needs to shout. It's the quiet ones that tend to carry more weight. Another gentle technique is to ask whether a story relies on a single extraordinary detail to hold itself together. Hoaxes often depend on one shimmering thread. A lone photograph, an unusual coincidence, a claim without context. When you spot such a thread, you can tug on it lightly, not harshly. Just enough to see whether it remains strong or unravels softly in your hands. If pulling the thread causes the rest of the story to drift apart, then you've learned something important without ever needing conflict. One of the most comforting realizations in all of this is that skepticism does not need to be cold. It can be warm, like a blanket placed gently over your thoughts. Instead of saying, "I refuse to believe this," curiosity can say, "Let me understand this better." When approached this way, skepticism becomes a companion rather than an adversary. It protects you without limiting your sense of wonder. Many people think they must choose between believing everything or believing nothing. But the mind is more flexible than that. You can hold stories loosely, appreciating their beauty even when you know they may not be real. You can explore mysteries warmly without being lost in them. You can enjoy the shimmer of the extraordinary while walking with solid steps through your everyday life. A helpful metaphor is to imagine curiosity wearing a seatbelt. You can still enjoy the ride, still gaze out the window at the strange landscapes of possibility, still feel the thrill of an idea that sparkles. The seatbelt does not restrict the experience. It simply keeps you safe while you explore. Another practice that keeps fact-checking calm is recognizing your own emotional landscape. If a story comforts you, ask why. If it alarms you, ask the same. Emotional awareness transforms fact-checking from a cold process into a tender one. You learn to see not just the story itself, but the feelings it stirs in you. You become both observer and participant, grounded in yourself even as you wander through the unknown. And when confusion does appear, as it will in a world filled with illusions, you can return to the simplest truths: your breath, your senses, the steady rhythm of reality around you. These are the anchors that keep you from drifting too far into stories that only mimic depth, but offer no foundation. In the end, gentle fact-checking is not about closing the door on wonder. It is about keeping that door unlocked while making sure the floor beneath your feet remains steady. It allows you to explore strange tales and beautiful possibilities with a clear mind and a calm heart. It preserves the sweetness of imagination while protecting you from slipping into confusion. As this sense of balance settles, a new question rises on the horizon, one that moves beyond hoaxes and illusions and into something much more intimate. If so many extraordinary stories are fragile or fabricated, then where does real wonder live? Where does awe hide in our ordinary days, waiting quietly to be noticed? The answer opens the path into the next chapter of our journey, where the extraordinary reveals itself not in time travelers or hidden portals, but in the simple, gentle moments that fill our lives each day. There is a quiet moment each morning, often overlooked, when the world feels newly formed. Light begins to drift across the floor in long, gentle strokes. Colours slowly return to objects that, only an hour earlier, were silhouettes wrapped in sleep. You breathe in, and for just a second, there is a brightness to the air, a promise that the day might contain something soft and unexpected. This moment, simple as it is, holds more wonder than any time machine ever described in fiction. And yet, because it is ordinary, many people walk past it without noticing. The truth is that awe does not need portals, paradoxes, or travellers slipping between centuries. Awe lives in the small details of life, so small that we often forget to look for them. But if you slow down, even slightly, the world begins to reveal its hidden layers. A ray of sunlight turning dust into tiny stars, a shadow shifting gently across a wall as clouds drift above, the sound of distant footsteps echoing down a hallway, each step a reminder that you share the world with others. These moments are not dramatic, but they are quietly miraculous. Consider the hush of midnight. Long after the day's noise has faded, the world softens into stillness. Even familiar things, chairs, books, the window frame, seem to hold their breath. If you listen closely, you might hear the faint hum of life continuing around you. A distant car, the soft whir of an appliance, the whisper of wind against glass. This stillness is its own kind of mystery, not because anything extraordinary is happening, but because you are finally still enough to notice. Or think of the simple act of watching a teacup release steam. That small, swirling cloud rises and dissolves into the air as though it carries a message meant only for that moment. Within its curling patterns is the quiet reminder that warmth can lift, fade, and return. It is the same with many things. Laughter drifting away, memories resurfacing, leaves falling in spirals from tall trees. None of it requires explanation to feel meaningful. These ordinary moments often hold the same emotional resonance as the extraordinary tales people tell about time travellers. There is also wonder in the ticking of a clock, not in the mechanical precision, but in the way each tick marks a moment that will never return. Far from being a reminder of time slipping away, this steady rhythm can feel soothing, like a heartbeat outside your body. It turns the passing of time into something gentle, something that keeps pace with you rather than rushing ahead. When we talk about time travel in stories, we often imagine escaping time's grasp. Yet in reality, being present with time, one small moment at a time, creates its own kind of magic. The natural world offers endless examples of this quiet beauty. The way sunlight filters through the leaves of a tree, turning each leaf into a tiny glowing lantern. The way rain gathers on a window pane, then races downward in paths that never quite repeat. The way insects hum in the early evening, creating a chorus that feels ancient and familiar. the way the air smells different just before a storm arrives, carrying a mix of coolness and electricity. These experiences contain no hoaxes, no illusions, no tricks. Yet they stir the same sense of wonder that leads people to believe in extraordinary stories. Even the human body is a landscape of marvels. Every breath you take is a collaboration between air and life, a soft exchange that happens thousands of times a day without requiring your conscious effort. Your heartbeat adjusts to your emotions, your posture, your thoughts. Your eyes interpret light bouncing off surfaces and translate it into the world you see. You don't need a time machine to feel connected to something magnificent. You carry a small universe within you every moment you're alive. There is also something deeply wondrous in memory. Think of how a scent can carry you back across years, or how a song can lift a forgotten emotion to the surface of your mind. These small acts of mental time travel happen without any machinery at all. They happen simply because you are human, because your mind is both a vessel for the present and a quiet archive of everything you've ever felt. Perhaps this is why stories about bending time feel so natural to us, because our inner lives already move through past, present and future as effortlessly as bird gliding between three branches of the same tree. When you begin to recognize the wonders hidden in ordinary life, an interesting shift occurs. Extraordinary stories become sweeter, not because you need them to be true, but because you understand the emotional landscape they draw from. You can enjoy tales of strange visitors, impossible photographs, or whispers from alternate timelines without depending on them to fill your sense of wonder. The world already offers enough wonder to hold you gently if you allow yourself to notice. And that noticing becomes easier once you slow down. When you take a moment to feel the coolness of the air on your skin, or listen to the soft murmur of your surroundings, you begin to experience reality the way you might experience a quiet song. Not quickly, not loudly, but with a kind of open attention that lets the beauty rise naturally from the world. Some people call this mindfulness, but it is also simply living with your senses awake. In this wakefulness, you realize that time itself is awe-inspiring, without needing to break or loop or bend. The fact that each moment arrives only once, yet carries infinite depth, is one of the universe's softest miracles. You don't need to travel to another century to feel wonder. You can find it in the warm weight of a blanket, the glow of a lamp in the evening, or the gentle familiarity of your own thoughts drifting into sleep. As you hold these small wonders in your awareness, the path ahead becomes clearer. If awe lives in the ordinary, then imagination becomes something more than escape. It becomes appreciation, and with appreciation comes a sense of belonging in the world as it is, not only in the worlds we invent. This understanding naturally leads us toward the final stretch of our journey, where we gather all the threads, wonder, belief, imagination, skepticism, and weave them into a soft reflection on what it means to be human in a world full of stories, both true and imagined. There's a particular softness that settles over the world at the end of a long journey, not the kind of ending marked by finality, but the kind that feels like a quiet exhale, as if the story itself is leaning back, stretching its limbs and finding a comfortable place to rest. In this gentle closing, the pieces of everything we've wandered through, time travel hoaxes, the psychology of belief, the warmth of community, the shimmer of digital illusions, and the wonder hidden in ordinary life begin to gather around you like small lanterns glowing softly in the dark. And as they settle, they reveal something tender, something quietly profound. The magic we search for out in the world is often the same magic we carry within ourselves. For all our fascination with travellers from the future or visitors from alternate timelines, the truth is that humans have always been skilled at creating wonder without any help from impossible machines. We do it in the stories we tell, the questions we ask, the hopes we carry, and the moments we choose to pay attention to. We create meaning the way a painter creates light, brushstroke by brushstroke, shaping our inner landscapes with imagination, memory, and feeling. When someone claims to have stepped out of another century, what draws us in isn't the literal possibility of such a thing. It's the reminder that life is richer, stranger, and more expansive than routine often lets us remember. These stories touch something soft in us, the longing for guidance, for mystery, for the sense that the universe might hold hidden layers. Even when the stories are inventions, they awaken real emotions. The hoax may be false, but the longing it reveals is true, and that longing is not a flaw. It is a testament to the human spirit. We are creatures who gaze at the horizon not just to know what's coming, but to imagine what might be there. We look backward not only to understand the past, but to reconnect with moments that shaped us. In this sense, time travel, whether real or fictional, is simply another expression of something deeply rooted in us, the desire to understand ourselves through the lens of time. But as we explored earlier, the world we now inhabit is one in which information can twist, multiply, or obscure itself like reflections in a hall of mirrors. Trust becomes a delicate thing, shaped as much by emotion as by fact. Yet even here, something hopeful emerges. When we learn to hold wonder gently, without clinging too tightly to any one story, we develop a kind of inner steadiness, a calm awareness that allows us to appreciate mystery without being overwhelmed by it. This inner steadiness turns out to be a quiet form of wisdom. It lets you enjoy the shimmer of an unusual photograph, the thrill of an uncanny coincidence, or the beauty of a mysterious idea, without needing to decide immediately what is real and what is not. It lets you carry curiosity the way you might carry a fragile object wrapped in cloth, tenderly, respectfully, without squeezing too hard. In this way, imagination and clarity walk alongside each other like companions rather than opposites. Along this path, you may notice that some of the most meaningful wonders are the ones that emerge from your own experiences. The stillness of a night when the world feels suspended, the laughter shared with someone you care about, the sudden insight that arrives unannounced, like a bird landing on your shoulder, the unexpected comfort of remembering that you have survived every difficult moment so far. These moments require no exaggeration, no illusion. They are small, but they are true, and their warmth stays with you quietly. If you look closely, you'll see that time itself offers its own gentle magic, the way days unfold one after another, carrying you forward even when you feel stuck. The way the past visits you in dreams, scents, and memories. The way the future waits patiently for you, shaping itself moment by moment with your choices. Time may not bend in the dramatic ways hoaxes describe, but it interacts with your life in ways that are intimate and deeply personal. It is both a river and a mirror, both a path and a story. So as we drift toward the end of this quiet exploration, imagine time flowing around you like a calm river at dusk. The surface reflects faint glimmers of light, some from the past, some from the future, and some from the present moment you're resting in right now. The water moves at its own pace, carrying old moments away while delivering new ones to your feet. And here you are, standing gently at the river's edge, neither rushing nor resisting, simply watching the current pass. In this peaceful place, you can let go of the need for certainty. You can allow wonder to visit without obligation. You can let truth and imagination share the same quiet space, knowing that both have their roles in the human experience. You can trust that even when stories blur or shadows shift, the core of who you are remains steady, curious, resilient, capable of holding mystery and clarity together without losing your way. And so, as this journey draws to a close, perhaps the most comforting thought is this: the extraordinary is not something you must find in distant futures or hidden doorways. It is something you create each time you notice a moment fully, each time you let yourself wonder, each time you allow a story, real or imagined, to soften your heart. Whether your eyes are still open or drifting slowly towards sleep, may you feel the quiet reassurance that the world is wide, the mind is deeper than we often realize, and wonder, gentle, unassuming wonder, is always close, waiting like a soft glow in the corner of your life,